who is making the championship playoffs this year? We feel like we've got 3 spaces confirmed, but that last playoff place, who knows who can get that place? And we are going to decide who I think could finish in that 6th place position, assuming that West Brom finish 5th. What's up, guys? Welcome back to Lex Alexa's. Last video, we talked about who I think could get promoted. In case you wanted to know, I won't spoil it, but you can always check the last video that I just made, which will go through who I think is getting promoted. Today, we're going to cover the very small matter of the top 6. So, I'm assuming that 2 of the 2 that I didn't predict to get promoted will get 3rd and 4th. West Brom, I think, is going to get 5th. But that 6th place position, I think 4 teams could get it. There could even be more, you know, if a couple of teams below them get some really good run of form, Middlesbrough and Watford included. But I'm going to be going through Norwich, who currently sit in 6th. But I'm going to look at the 3 teams below Norwich. And honestly, they're not that far behind at all. We have got Hull, we have got Coventry, and we've got Preston. So we're going to talk about these 4 teams today and which one of these 4 sides will get 6th place. So this is really going to be exciting. If you guys enjoy what you see, please smash the like button. It really does help. Please do hit the subscribe button if you've not done so. It really does help the algorithm, and it really helps my channel. And please also share the channel too if you want to see more of this stuff in the future. It really helps. But without any further ado, let's decide who on earth is getting that 6th place. So again, like last time, the best way to start is to talk about the current predicament in the championship table before we have the madness, which is Easter weekend. As I said in my intro, it is Norwich that currently occupy the last playoff place with 61 points. However, Norwich have played 1 game more than Hull, Coventry and Preston. If those 3 teams were to win their games in hand, they could be within either joint on points for Norwich or within 1 to 2 points behind them. So that is why I'm including those teams to be involved in that conversation. So I really do think it is going to be between these 4 sides. Obviously, Middlesbrough, Cardiff, you know, could maybe sneak in there. Sunderland, no. Watford, you never know. But I think it's going to be between Norwich, Hull, Coventry and Preston for that last 6th place position. And there's a lot that's going to be decided out of this. Again, I'm going to look at the run-in. I'm going to look at the current injuries and the players risking suspension as well. And I'm going to give you my final thoughts of who I think will get that 6th place position. There's a couple of other external things that I'm going to be talking about to get to my point. So we're going to go down from the order from the highest to the lowest position of the 4 teams. Before we break down all of the sides that are consider getting into the top 6 or at least 6th place, let's look at the poll that I released to you guys, which basically just wanted a very simple question. Who was getting that 6th place position? So you can see on the votes, 45% say Norwich, but it's very close. I think this poll as a whole was the closest poll that I have seen. Then you had Coventry at 34%. I would question how much of that was influenced by Coventry's FA Cup performance for the fact they've now got a semi-final. And then Hull down at 11%, which surprises me how low Hull are. And then Preston at 9%. Let's start off with Norwich. So Norwich are in a unique position of those 4 sides. We've actually played a game more than those 4 sides. So because of this, they are the only one of the 4 sides that have gone over the 60-point mark. It has been a bit of a bizarre season for Norwich, who started well, had a really terrible middle, but are now ending it in some fabulous form. And they have got themselves right back in the conversation of getting into the top 6. Now, it is no means a guarantee, however, because of those other teams who could get into that position. And I think definitely with the goal scoring, they're now starting to get into more of those games. Their home form has really been a crucial part to why they've improved. Their away form has been a little bit touch and go for me, but that may be something that they could survive still within the top 6, depending how the other 3 perform. So Norwich's fixtures to the end of the season look like this. So very interesting enough that we have got some really, really crucial games. Plymouth at home, I think they'll pick up 3 points, especially if Plymouth do not get rid of Ian Foster before that game. But then the first week of April, in my opinion, is Norwich's toughest time. An away day against Leicester, followed by a home trip to Ipswich, which is only within a matter of days. Then only 3 days after that, it is a trip to Hillsborough against Sheffield Wednesday. The reason I think this is the toughest, well, away to Leicester, I think is always a tough game. Ipswich, I think, will be a fierce derby, and I think both teams would definitely not want to lose this game. They could be helped with the fact that if Ipswich need to pick up 3 points, they could allow the openness of Ipswich's back line to get themselves 3 points here. But Sheffield Wednesday, I think, is going to be tough. Reason being is that Sheffield Wednesday, at this point of the season, will be looking like that they could maybe climb out of the relegation zone. So Sheffield Wednesday's form to this game will really factor how difficult this game, I think, will be for Norwich. If Sheffield Wednesday are struggling, then I think this will be quite a routine win for Norwich. But if Sheffield Wednesday are doing well and they're still within that dogfight of trying to fight the drop, then I think Sheffield Wednesday will absolutely bring it. That's then followed by an away trip against Preston, which I think is a very crucial game, considering Preston are really not that far behind. As I said, if Preston win their game in hand, which is against Southampton, I believe, if they win that, they're only 2 points behind Norwich. So it really is a top six pointer in that game. Then I think they follow that up with Bristol City and Swansea at home. I think that's two very, very nice fixtures, and both separated by a week as well, which I think is even nicer. And then they end the season away to Birmingham. Now, this looks okay on paper, but at the same time, if Birmingham need to win to avoid the drop, I think this could be a very difficult game for Norwich to pick up 3 points. So I think Norwich should definitely look at Bristol City and Swansea as their third and second to last games, and really pick up 6 points there to be in the upper hand of getting into that final 6th place position. So overall, definitely a mixed bag there. I think definitely some pretty nice home games, I would say, maybe with Ipswich being the exception of that, but some pretty tough away games, and it is our away form that I'm a little bit concerned with Norwich, and that can definitely be their weakness going into the race of in the top 6. So now let's look at the injuries and suspensions, and it's quite interesting actually. So you can see that they've got a pretty hefty injury list actually, and with some first team players. Shane Duffy, who has been injured since February. It's unknown of when he's going to return. I think with the international break ending, I think we're going to start figuring out when these players are going to return from injury. Jonathan Rowe for me is the big one. I'm really impressed how Norwich have continued their form without the influence of Jonathan Rowe, who has been, in my opinion, one of the young players of the season in the Championship. He has been sensational, especially for the Ipswich game. He'd want to appear again because he managed to score a brace against Ipswich and was wholeheartedly the reason why Norwich even got a result. Grant Hanley has been out for a while, so that's 2 centre-backs out for Norwich. So potentially their depth within their back line is a little bit restrictive at the moment, and Gian Lewis has picked up an injury more recently in the middle of March. With the players risking suspension, Kenny McLean is the one that scares me the most. So he's on 9 yellow cards, and he can get a 2-game ban with 1 more yellow card. McLean in that midfield position is really, really fundamental. He actually has been sensational. At the age of 32, he really still knows how to thread the pass through, and he has done a sensational job. Ashley Barnes, I actually don't think will be too bad if he does get a 1-game suspension, as long as Josh Sargent stays fit. I do think they've got a couple of injuries in that back line, so if they do pick up a couple of injuries in that back line, I think that could affect them. But again, we're going to really start to see within the first game of this game week, I find, to see how many of his injuries we're talking about today and how many of them are going to start to being recovered. So the fact that we've not got a due date, I can't really base my thinking of, are they going to make another appearance? I do think, likewise, what I spoke about a lot in my last video, I don't think momentum is going to be a big factor here. What's going to be the biggest factor is going to be the circumstances of the opposition. It's also going to be down to the availability of the players, and the fresh injuries and the fresh suspensions, which is why I'm looking at the risk of suspensions and the current crop of players out to see the resources and to see what players may or may not be available for this crunch time of the season. So I do think Norwich have got some good parts in there. I definitely don't think it's going to be straightforward, but I do think they are a little bit favourable within their position at this moment of time. Here are a couple comments about Norwich regarding the polls that I made. So Tony Hayes is predicting Norwich to get to that 6th place position. I think that is definitely a very strong prediction. Ian Evans is saying Norwich for me. Coventry have done really, really well, which we'll definitely talk about later on. I feel Norwich in the league at the moment will be too strong for others trying to catch a 6th. It'll be interesting to see how Coventry hope. Yeah, so that's definitely going to be a massive talking point when we go around to Coventry. And then finally, Honey Gun again has said Norwich stand the best chance. They're doing brilliantly, and if they can tweak that away form a bit, they should be fine. I 100% agree with you, Honey Gun. It is the away form that is giving me the most nerves right now. But I genuinely think they have got a spectacular chance. I really, really do. It's really just now a question to see, can they deliver the goods? Can they fix that away form? Can they get into that 6th position? I think they really got a good chance of doing so. The next team to talk about is Hull City. Now, I do think Hull get underestimated so much, and I really would love to see them within the top 6. They've had a brilliant season with Liam Rosenior. I think Hull have been one of those sides where I think they have been real mixed opinions whether if they were going to do well with Liam Rosenior with a full season at the helm. And I've got to say, they have really, really impressed me. And I think one of the benefits of Hull is their improvement in their squad in the January transfer window. And because of that, their form has been relatively good. It hasn't been as strong as it has been at the start of the season, I would say. But I do think they are keeping up with the pace, which is really, really good. So if we look at the remaining fixtures for Hull, so as you can see with Hull, they've got one more game than what Norwich have, because they have, got a game in hand, which is against Coventry, which is really exciting. So if we talk about these sides, Stoke at home, I think Hull could get 3 points here. It's hard, I think Stoke will definitely want to win, considering the position they find themselves in the table, but I expect Hull to get 3 points here. Leeds away is going to be tough. I think that's definitely their hardest game here. Then followed by Cardiff away and Middlesbrough at home. 2 mid-table sides. If their momentum's strong, that could be tough. But if they are not looking like that they're going to get into the top 6, then I think that could be 2 pretty winnable games for Hull. Then they follow that out with QPR at home. QPR, if they give themselves a bit of breathing distance, I think that could be a winnable game for Hull. But if QPR are really fighting, I think that'll be tough. Watford, I actually think will be okay. Then there's that crunch game. 23rd of April is going to be massive, because not only you've got Coventry versus Hull, but you've got Southampton, Leicester. Those 2 games running at once is monumental. That day, I think, will answer the questions of promotion and potentially answer the questions of the top 6 as well. And I'm going to talk about the significance of that game for Coventry's sake when I talk about them next. Then they have their last home game against Ipswich Town. Not easy, and they would not want a repeat of the reverse fixture, but I do think with the improvement of Hull's squad, I think they've got a real chance here. And then Plymouth away to end the season. I think if Plymouth are still on the verge of going down, if they get a new manager, if you heard me in my last video, I'm predicting Neil Warnock to potentially step in to try and salvage survival for Plymouth Argyle if Ian Foster does get dismissed. So overall, looking at the fixtures for Hull, I actually think they're not too bad, I've got to say. Some tricky ones thrown in there, some really crucial ones. Coventry especially, I think it's going to be the most important one they've got to face. But I don't think they're going to win all of their games. Leeds, for instance, I think will be their toughest game, but their most crucial game, without a doubt, is that Coventry game, which could be in a way to benefit Hull, and I'll explain why later on. But we'll also talk about their injuries and their risks of suspension. So if you see here, their only major injury is Cyrus Christie, who has been injured since January the 5th. I actually don't think that's a terrible loss. I think the biggest thing they lose with Cyrus Christie is experience, but they have proven to cope quite well without him. Risk of suspension. Now, this interests me. So Jacob Greaves, who has been probably up there for one of their players of the season, could get a 2-game ban if he gets one more yellow card, because he'll nearly have 10 yellow cards. Ozan Tufan, a really good attacking midfielder in that role, could be at risk for a 1-game ban, and Aaron Connolly as well, potentially in risk of a 1-game ban. I think Tufan and Greaves especially are really, really important for that Hull City squad. So if you go back to the fixtures, what games do I think they could take the hit? So I think for Jacob Greaves, if he gets the yellow card against Leeds, I don't think it'll be the end of the world if he doesn't play Cardiff and Middlesbrough. And honestly, I think that's probably going to be the case for the rest of them. I've got to be honest. I think Leeds might be the game they might want, because they do not want to get the yellow cards just before Leeds. Because I mean, unless they do write it off and they admit that they're just not going to get something, you know, Leeds right now are unbeaten at home. But that will be what I would potentially think about. If they get the yellow card and take the hit there, I think Cardiff and Middlesbrough aren't terrible games to miss, and I think they are quite winnable actually for that Hull City side. If you go back to the community tab, this is another comment from Will Hull City AFC. Hull, he believes, will get into the top 6. The quality they have, I think, will show through in the final games against high-end sides. We always do well in games when we're under the most pressure. Also, we have a game in hand too. That's right. So that game in hand, I think, is crucial. It is against Coventry away, but now when I'm talking about Coventry, I think that game is going to be very, very difficult for Coventry, and I'm going to speak about that now. We now move on to Coventry. Now, Coventry are in a very unique position compared to the other sides. They are only 1 point behind Hull City, so if they win their game in hand, they are only 1 point behind Norwich. Now, Coventry are the only side in the Championship, let alone this cluster of teams, who are still in the FA Cup. They have got a semi-final against Manchester United at Wembley. If you go into Coventry's fixtures here, you think, wow, blimey, that's a lot of games. But it is actually still only 8 games that Coventry need to play. In fact, no, 9 games, forgive me. It's 9 games that Coventry still need to play. But the unique thing about Coventry is that they've got a Manchester United game in the FA Cup semi-final sandwiched in between that run-in. And if you notice the timings of it, look at this. They have got just over a week to prepare for it from when they play Birmingham. But the short turnaround between that game and Hull is 2 days. Now, I just spoke about Hull saying that game against Coventry is Hull's most crucial game of the season. I think it's also the same for Coventry as well. But do they go strong in that semi-final against Manchester United, knowing if they win that, they can make it to their first FA Cup final since they won the competition back in the 80s? So it's a real conflict, I think, that they find within this part of the season. I think it is Coventry's most important game, and you think they have the benefit being at home, but the turnaround with it being 2 days, the intensity they're going to be put under against a Premier League side like Manchester United, I think will make things really, really tricky for Coventry. For the rest of the games, I think Huddersfield could be okay. Huddersfield having a little bit of a say, actually. They do play a good couple of the sides chasing for the top 6. Cardiff, again, that's the second time we've seen them, so I think they have got a big say. Leeds, they've appeared again, so Ipswich as well. So we spoke about in the last video that the playoff chasing sides have got a big, impact within the promotion, but it's also vice versa with the promotion sides having a big effect within the top 6 race. Southampton is going to be a very tough game for Coventry there as well. So I think the disadvantage that Coventry do have is that 3 of their games are against the top 4. So I do think that really makes things difficult, but they do have games against teams around them. And that whole game especially, even if they do lose 1 or maybe 2 games against that top 4, they could really make up some important ground if they get 3 points here. I think Cardiff is a winnable game, especially if Cardiff don't appear out the blocks straight away from their previous game. Birmingham, depending how strong they're looking, I think that could be a good game for Coventry as well. Blackburn, again, if they're looking a little bit safe, I think that could be a good game as well. So in fact, Coventry are also playing against a lot of sides in the relegation battle, which can really be hit and miss. It's either to the point where those teams are quite safe from the drop and they're not really got too much to play for, or they've got everything to play for to maintain their championship survival. So that relegation picture, I think, could really have a good impact as well. So there's a lot of factors to consider, but the FA Cup one is a unique one with the very short turnaround of 2 days from that Manchester United game to that Hull City game, I think that potentially could be a distraction that won't serve Coventry favours. It is already difficult enough for them, but if you look at their injury and risk of suspension list, it is quite scary. So their injury of Sakamoto, where he was injured since February, is not a good one. He's not returning until May, the end of May. And by that point, the only time that maybe they could get him is, if pushing his injury return date forward could be playoffs. But at the same time, they've practically lost Sakamoto to the end of the season, which is a real shame. The suspensions, Jay Da Silva, I don't think will be a terrible loss for them if he does get suspended. He's been touch and go whether he's been starting games. Ben Sheep is the one that scares me the most, because Ben Sheep in that midfield position is important, to say the least, in that midfield position. If they do get overrun in their midfield, it will be typically because Ben Sheep's either not playing or he's not having a good game. So I do think Ben Sheep is an important player, and he will be a big miss to have a 1-game suspension. So I think they've got to be very careful with that. I think the others I don't think are going to be terrible, but Ben Sheep is the one that I'll look over. So out of all of these games, maybe they could take the hit against Cardiff. So in the first game back, if Ben Sheep picks up a yellow card and he misses Cardiff, it's not the end of the world, I don't think. And then he can go straight on and having some really, really tough games after that. You've got Leeds, then followed by Southampton. So I think those games he needs to be featured in. If he gets that yellow card against Cardiff, for instance, and he misses Leeds, it could be quite a hideous time for Coventry. So that is my views on that. Fixtures, some all right, but a lot of relegation, which teams which could make things difficult, and 3 of the top 4. So I do think Coventry on paper, average league position would say they don't have too bad of a run. But I would argue, based on the stakes, I think they've got the hardest set of games. The final team to talk about, of course, is Preston North End. I think we still have to include them. So Preston are only 1 point behind Coventry. So if they win their game in hand, which is against Southampton, they'll be 2 points behind Norwich. So likewise, when I was talking about Southampton with their position with the promotion, they need a lot to go their way to get into that top 6, in my opinion. So they're definitely the least likely, as it was suggested by that poll. But having said that, I do think Preston could pull off a couple of surprises here and there. So let's look at their fixtures, and it is really quite interesting, actually. So if we go through it, we've got Rotherham. That's 3 points for me. Then they've got Birmingham. Again, Birmingham's a strange one for me because I've not seen how they're playing with Gary Rowett. So it's quite difficult for me to make a view about Birmingham at the moment. I think Watford might be okay. I think Watford will be strong in their first couple of games with Cleverley, but I think it'll be around that time, early April, where I do think Watford may now not completely revert back to their old ways, but I don't think they'll be as strong. Huddersfield, I think could be winnable, but if Huddersfield are really desperate for survival, that could be tricky. Norwich is huge against a fellow Championship playoff rival. And considering it's Norwich who they're chasing, Preston really need to go for 3 points, or at least not lose that game. Then there's that game in hand against Southampton. So if they beat Norwich and then they win that game in hand against Southampton, it all changes. Then against QPR. So QPR are playing against a lot of sides chasing the top 6 in their remaining couple of games. So preview going, or like prediction going through regarding the relegation talk. That's definitely going to be an area we'll be talking a lot about QPR about. Then their final home game, Preston, is against Leicester. I mean, who knows? If Leicester have already been promoted by this stage, that could be okay. But if not, then that'll be a very tough game for Preston. And then they end the season with West Brom. So we've not seen West Brom a lot, not even a lot last video. So we've rarely seen West Brom. So if anything, West Brom have got, I think, quite a favourable run. It sounds like they've got a lot of relegation teams and mid-table teams. So I definitely think that solidifies my thoughts of West Brom getting that 5th place, or maybe even improving it if they can really, really get their form to improve. I think that fixture list isn't really that bad for Preston, I've got to be honest, but based on the performance factors, I do see Preston being the least consistent out of them with their style of play. I don't think they create many chances in their games, which I do think could be one factor that might make them fall short. we're looking at injuries and suspension. So injuries, unfortunately, Crossadere really have not been featured at all this season, so I don't really consider that being a concern. Barista suspension, though, is a little bit of a different factor. Ali McCann, definitely a very prominent player in the midfield for Preston, at risk of missing 2 games, so that could be really, really detrimental to them. Jordan Story hasn't really been featured. Mads Foster Jensen would be a huge miss. And Osmajic, with that forward line to give some really good competition for Reece Jacobson, I think he's really needed as well. So I say 3 of those 4 players, if they get suspended, that could be a bad effect for them. So what games? I think, for me, the best game to get a yellow card for Preston now is actually Rotherham. Because I think if they do skip Birmingham and Watford, and then they move that on with some nice games to Huddersfield, then followed by Norwich, I think they have to be there for Norwich, definitely. That is where we need Preston's strongest team to be if you want Preston to be within the top 6. Then follow that up with Southampton as well. Yeah, so it's those 2 games back to back, which I think is the most difficult part of Preston's run-in. So quite honestly, I think as long as they play their suspensions not in those 2 games, I actually don't think it would be that bad for those players to serve the suspensions in those any other games, to be fair. So that's what I'll be thinking if I was in that position. We've talked about the poll, we've talked about the comments, we've talked about everyone's predictions. Now we've got to think of who's getting that 6th place, and honestly, it is so tough. I really do not know. I can't think of an order in terms of Preston, Hull, Norwich and Coventry. They're really separated by, very, very little. God, this is tough. And I'm trying not to base it on recent momentum as well. So I do think, it's really just going to be down to see how these teams are going to approach it. I think, for now, I'm going to back Norwich to get that 6th place. I think their home form is too strong, personally. And I think their home games are looking a little bit nice. I think the only slippery one could be Ipswich. But again, they've got a good record against Ipswich. And if they get a good result, then ultimately, I think if they could pick up maximum points in their home games, that might be enough points to leap them over the line. That will definitely easily get them over 70 points. So I think Norwich for now, but I think a lot is riding on that Coventry-Hull game. I think it really, really does almost fall within that. And with Hull, Coventry and Preston having those games in hand, for Hull and Coventry's sake, it's the game against each other. So one of them will potentially benefit. If they draw it, none of them benefit from it. So there's a lot riding on that game. And Preston have got their game in hand against Southampton, which I think is going to be a tough game for them. For me, I think Hull edge out Coventry because of Coventry being involved in FA Cup action. So for me, it'll be Norwich 6th, Hull 7th, and I'm going to actually say Preston 8th and Coventry fall to 9th, which actually might sound really shocking to you. But I do think Coventry, with their average league positions, won't suggest they've got the hardest games, but with teams fighting relegation, they've got a lot of those teams, and they've got they're the only team chasing for top 6. They've got 3 of the top 4 to play, and I think 2 of them are away from home as well, which I think is really, really tough. So for me, it's Coventry that's going to be 9th, and again, I think it's going to be Norwich, but only just edging out Hull. So yeah, that is my order for now. There is a slight change in the order, of course, with Preston overtaking Coventry. That's what I think might happen, but again, I'd be more than happy to be proven wrong. I am so thrilled for how close it is in this entire season, and the top 6 race is certainly not disappointing us. That is also going to give you a good hint of what my final table predictions is going to look like. Stay tuned for that. I don't know when I'm going to make it, but I'm going to make it very, very soon. So next time, I'm going to try and go through the relegation picture. I mean, how on earth am I going to go through the relegation picture? There's about 8 teams that could go down, so that's going to be an exciting day. You may see my next video be my score predictions. It depends how quickly I edit the last video and this one. So the next video could be my score predictions for the Easter games, or it will be the relegation picture. So it's really just going to be down to whatever you see next. So if you guys like what you see, please smash the like button. It really does help the growth of this channel. Please do hit the subscribe button too. And please also share the channel as well. All three of these things are free to do, and it really, really do help. Thank you guys so much for watching. You guys are legendary if you saw me in this video. And as always, I'll see you guys soon. Take care, everyone.